Imagine a world where wars are no longer decided by sheer firepower or the number of tanks amassed at the border, but instead by severing the unseen arteries, the fragile veins of logistics that feed armies, sustain campaigns, and ultimately decide the fate of nations. At this very moment, Ukrainian troops are grappling with sudden, crippling shortages of ammunition and critical supplies. Yet this crisis did not erupt in the heat of battle or as a result of a dramatic offensive. Its true epicenter was Pavlohrad, a city whose name has now become synonymous with logistical catastrophe. There, a single thunderous explosion obliterated one of Ukraine's largest eastern supply hubs in an instant, sending shockwaves not just across the front lines, but deep into the corridors of power in Kyiv, Brussels, and Washington. That blast was no ordinary strike. It was a calculated assault on the core of Ukraine's supply chain, a sprawling network painstakingly built over years, now splintered in seconds. The aftermath has been ruthless and far-reaching. From artillery shells to drone parts, from diesel fuel to rifle rounds, everything at the front is now ruled by scarcity and uncertainty. On the ground, the situation for Ukrainian soldiers is dire. They are forced to ration every last shell, to make do with what little they have. Commanders juggle mismatched supplies, forced to improvise with whatever scant resources trickle through, if anything arrives at all. Stories have emerged of artillery crews receiving only a handful of shells for an entire week, and infantry units going days without fresh ammunition. This is more than a temporary setback or a logistical hiccup. In Brussels and Washington, the conversation has shifted from strategy and offense to survival and crisis management. Western support, once seemingly unbreakable and enthusiastic, now teeters on the edge. Leaders openly warn of a systemic crisis, a supply collapse that threatens to tip the entire conflict towards disaster. Here lies a harsh lesson for every military planner and civilian observer alike. If we still believe wars hinge solely on tanks, tactics, and heroics, we are missing the true fight. Failing to grasp this shift, from firepower to logistics, means repeating fatal errors, not just in war, but in any complex system where a single vulnerable link can unravel years of effort. How did one explosion at Pavlohrad lay bare the soft underbelly of an entire war effort? And why does this moment rewrite everything we assumed about modern conflict? To understand the magnitude of this turning point, we must trace how the Pavlohrad attack shattered not just stockpiles, but the entire architecture of Ukraine's wartime logistics. The story begins long before the fireball lit up the night sky, with a decade of preparation and Western aid invested in a network intended to be invulnerable. Behind the headlines, a single question lingered in every military briefing room. What made Pavlohrad so vital? And why did its destruction ripple from Kyiv to Brussels and beyond? To grasp the magnitude of panic and the significance of the loss, one must understand exactly what vanished in that blinding instant. Pavlohrad was not merely another city on the map. It was the beating heart of Ukraine's eastern war effort, the central hub through which nearly every major military supply pulsed toward the front. Hidden beneath its surface and inside sprawling warehouses, the Ukrainians had gathered tens of thousands of artillery shells, hundreds of rockets, and volatile fuel chemicals, enough to keep entire brigades firing for many months on end. Satellite reconnaissance and Western advisors had identified Pavlohrad as the logistical linchpin for the entire Donbass front. Then, in the silent hours before dawn, the skies above Pavlohrad exploded into unnatural daylight. The blast was immense, illuminating the horizon for dozens of miles and erasing not just a single storage site, but an entire logistics complex painstakingly built up over years, much of it with Western backing. The explosion could be seen from towns nearly 50 kilometers away, and the shockwave shattered windows across half the city. Within hours, satellite images and hundreds of eyewitness videos flooded the internet. Ukrainian authorities attempted to downplay the event, but the evidence was impossible to suppress. The loss was not simply equipment, it was the erasure of the very backbone sustaining Ukraine's fight in the east. Western intelligence confirmed that not only ammunition, but also railway cars, loading equipment, and fuel depots were destroyed. Overnight, critical lifelines snapped. Ukrainian units at the front found themselves abruptly cut off, forced to ration shells or, worse, run out entirely. Commanders scrambled to patch the gaps with mismatched munitions, but by then, the once steady stream had slowed to a mere trickle. On the battlefield, this meant long, eerie silences, moments when Ukrainian artillery simply ceased to answer Russian barrages. In some sectors, entire batteries went quiet for days, ceding initiative to advancing Russian troops. The destruction of a logistics hub like Pavlohrad is not just about material losses. It is about months, even years, of infrastructure and careful planning wiped out in seconds. Time Ukraine cannot recover quickly. The true cost is measured not only in what was destroyed, but in the precious time now lost for rebuilding. In one fell swoop, Ukraine lost not only stockpiles, but also the specialized loading cranes, the fuel trucks, and the trained personnel who managed the complex system. Was this catastrophe mere misfortune? Or did it signal the opening move in a new, far more calculated campaign? In the aftermath, Western capitals scrambled to assess the damage and their own vulnerabilities. What happened at Pavlohrad was more than a setback. It was a warning. The shock in NATO headquarters was palpable. Military historians immediately drew parallels to the Second World War, when German fuel depots were targeted by Allied bombers, leading to the sudden paralysis of once mighty panzer divisions. While the world watched armored columns and drone swarms, Russia was plotting its real assault far from the front. The West had its eyes on tanks, while Moscow targeted the arteries that kept those tanks moving. The destruction of the Pavlohrad ammunition hub was not just a blow to Ukraine. It was the unveiling of a new doctrine: starve the front by crippling its lifelines. Virtually overnight, Russia's focus shifted from head-on attrition to a relentless war on logistics. Trenches and armored vehicles became secondary. Instead, Russian missiles zeroed in on rail junctions, vital bridges, repair depots, and power substations. Each strike was not just an explosion, it was a scalpel, slicing through the invisible web sustaining Ukraine's defenses. The Pavlohrad attack was no aberration. It triggered a calculated campaign. In the days that followed, Russian forces struck logistical hubs across Dnipro, Kremenchuk, and Poltava. Each precision hit severed another lifeline, bleeding Ukraine's war machine dry. The ability to repair, resupply, and reinforce the front lines began to unravel, thread by thread. Western satellite imagery tracked the systematic targeting of warehouses, railheads, and fuel storage sites all across central and eastern Ukraine. Rebuilding these shattered networks is not measured in days or weeks. Some hubs, painstakingly developed over years with Western aid and expertise, were wiped out in a single night. As the supply chain faltered, Ukrainian units reported dwindling ammunition. Even basic rifle rounds became precious. Commanders described stretches of the front falling eerily silent, rationing each shell, sometimes left completely empty-handed, their only option to withdraw or hunker down and wait. Meanwhile, Western factories are straining to meet Ukraine's soaring demand. European production lags, and even American plants running around the clock, cannot fill the widening gap. Inside NATO, the debate turns bitter. Should shrinking stockpiles be shipped to Ukraine, or held back for the alliance's own defense? Every delay, every argument, deepens the crisis. Politicians in Berlin and Paris face mounting pressure from their own voters, wary of sending the last reserves abroad. When supplies do arrive, they are often a jumbled mix, different calibers, ages, and standards. Ukrainian crews must improvise, pairing whatever shells arrive with whatever guns they have, sacrificing both accuracy and safety. This logistical chaos wears down morale and slows the pace of battle. In some cases, crews have been forced to manually adapt artillery pieces to fire shells designed for entirely different systems, risking catastrophic failure and injury. On the other side, Russian artillery pounds with relentless consistency, well supplied, precise, and methodical. The disparity grows sharper each day. While Ukraine improvises, Russia orchestrates a campaign designed to exhaust its enemy without ever launching a massive offensive. This echoes the German strategy on the Eastern Front during World War II, where the Wehrmacht sought to cut Soviet supply lines and let attrition do the rest. If this shift goes unnoticed, the consequences could be ruinous. No amount of valor or grit can bridge the gap when shells, fuel, or bridges run out. The risk is not just defeat on the battlefield, but a total collapse, where even the bravest defenders are rendered powerless by forces they cannot confront head-on. But the crisis on the ground is only half the story. Behind closed doors, Western policymakers are grappling with a dilemma that could define the future of the entire alliance. Some analysts warn that a logistical collapse in Ukraine could set a precedent, emboldening future aggressors who see supply chain warfare as a tool to undermine NATO from within. Is Ukraine's front line faltering not from defeat in open battle, but from an invisible siege that no courage can withstand? This is not a collapse of trenches under fire, nor a panicked retreat before advancing armor. Instead, Ukrainian defenses are being hollowed out from within, not by tactical blunders, but by the slow suffocation of dwindling supplies. Where artillery once roared, silence now settles, as units withdraw or wait, unable to answer enemy fire. This echoes the fate of the French army during the latter stages of World War I, when a lack of munitions led to mutinies and the near collapse of entire divisions. The crux is not a lack of bravery, but a shortage of bullets. Positions are abandoned without resistance, ground ceded in eerie quiet. In vital sectors, the only choice is retreat or a futile stand, hoping for resupply that feels increasingly out of reach. Ukrainian troops, once hailed for their resilience, now find themselves facing the grim reality of fighting with empty hands. Behind closed doors, leaders of NATO and the European Union argue endlessly, each nation trapped by its own politics, priorities, and production bottlenecks. Factories are too slow to adapt, while political squabbling freezes urgently needed aid. Every bureaucratic delay on paper means real losses on the ground. In Washington, legislative gridlock stalls billion-dollar support packages for months, while in Eastern Europe, transport bottlenecks delay critical shipments. Western unity, once seemingly unbreakable, has begun to erode. News cycles move on, voters grow restless, and doubts about costs and risks seep into public debate. As Western resolve phrase, Russia methodically exploits every logistical gap, advancing wherever Ukrainian lines are weakest. This pattern mirrors the fate of the British in Malaya during World War II, where overstretched supply lines and lack of reinforcements led to rapid collapse. The crisis is not just about shells. With modern surveillance and drones, every convoy, every warehouse, every route is a target. The few supplies that do move are hunted, sometimes destroyed en route, sometimes arriving too late to matter. Russian drones and missiles have turned the supply roads of eastern Ukraine into a deadly gauntlet, reminiscent of the infamous Highway of Death during the Gulf War. Ukrainian commanders face an agonizing dilemma: spread their forces thin and risk losing all, or abandon entire regions and watch the frontline contract. The sense of inevitability grows, especially as Western aid is delayed by red tape or arrives in the form of old, unreliable stockpiles. In the most desperate cases, units have been forced to retreat from fortified positions simply because they ran out of ammunition, not because of enemy breakthroughs. If the flow of weapons truly dries up, it is not just soldiers at stake, but entire regions, towns and cities that could fall without resistance, populations uprooted in mere days. For the West, the stakes are existential. Its credibility and faith in modern alliances to answer real threats hang by a thread. A supply collapse in Ukraine would reverberate far beyond the battlefield, undermining NATO deterrence and emboldening adversaries elsewhere. If logistics-first warfare is now the defining reality, what lessons and what warnings emerge from this unraveling crisis? The destruction of the Pavlohrad ammunition hub was the catalyst, a single event that shattered illusions and exposed vulnerabilities. From that moment, the true shape of the conflict came into focus. Military academies around the world are already rewriting their curricula, placing logistics at the center of modern warfare studies. Can the outcome of a war truly hinge on things as mundane as warehouses, railway bridges, or the silent veins that feed the front lines? Time and again, the answer is yes. The destruction of the Pavlohrad ammunition hub was not merely an explosion, it was a flashing warning. In today's conflicts, logistics are not just important, they are everything. All the valor, innovation, and cutting-edge weapons in the world cannot make up for empty depots or silent railways. It is tempting to focus on tanks, drones, or the chaos of battle. Yet victories and defeats often come down to the movement of what sustains an army: shells, fuel, spare parts, information. When these essentials vanish, the mightiest forces are left powerless. Courage alone cannot load a cannon without shells, nor can resolve repair a bridge destroyed by a single missile. Modern military supply chains are dazzlingly intricate. But with complexity comes fragility. When a war effort relies on a handful of crucial nodes, like Pavlohrad, a single targeted strike can erase years of preparation in a single night. The lesson is harsh but clear. The strongest chain is only as strong as its weakest link. This is not unique to Ukraine. The Allies learned a similar lesson in the Ardennes during the Battle of the Bulge, where the destruction of fuel dumps nearly doomed the counteroffensive. Real resilience is not about brute force. It is about backup plans, redundancy, and rapid adaptation. The power to foresee threats and diversify supplies can mean the difference between survival and collapse. The shock to Ukraine and NATO's urgent response proves that even the most advanced alliances can be crippled by neglecting the drab backbone of logistics. It is a lesson echoed in business, where supply chain disruptions can topple global giants overnight, as seen during the COVID-19 pandemic. So, what practical steps can be taken to prevent a repeat of Pavlohrad? Military experts suggest several concrete measures. First, decentralize storage and supply nodes, so that no single strike can cripple the entire system. Second, invest in rapid repair and mobile logistics units capable of rebuilding on the move. Third, prioritize the protection of supply lines with advanced air defenses and constant surveillance. Fourth, create stockpiles closer to the front, but concealed and dispersed to reduce vulnerability. These truths are not just for generals or policymakers. They hold for every complex endeavor: business, government, even personal ambitions. The least visible, least glamorous point is often the most vulnerable, and it demands the most vigilance. The collapse of a single server, a critical supplier, or a key employee can unravel success in hours. Ignore these lessons, and you invite disaster. The price is not merely theoretical. It can mean lost fortunes, shattered security, or entire systems breaking down at the moment they are needed most. The cost of not heeding Pavlohrad's warning is measured in missed chances, and sometimes in lives. The echo of a single explosion can reach across continents and decades. But the story does not end with a single explosion. In the aftermath, a new kind of war has begun, one where every shipment, every route, and every decision could tip the balance. In Ukraine, commanders are already experimenting with decentralized storage, rapid supply convoys, and the use of drones to scout and secure logistics routes. The West, too, is reevaluating its assumptions, with NATO planners now tasked to audit and reinforce the alliance's own supply nodes. Wars are not won on battlefields alone. Victory belongs to those who see the invisible threads, the supply lines, the networks, the systems quietly holding everything in place. While the world watches explosions and shifting front lines, it is the silent collapse of logistics that tips the scales. In every great conflict, from the Napoleonic Wars to Vietnam, the side with the stronger, more resilient supply chain has ultimately prevailed. The destruction of Pavlohrad was not just a loss of ammunition. It was the sudden unraveling of years of effort, echoing from Ukrainian trenches to distant Western capitals. When Ukraine's largest ammo hub vanished in a single night, a chain reaction began, one that exposed critical weaknesses in both Ukrainian and NATO strategies. The lesson is being studied in Beijing, Tehran, and capitals around the globe. History is clear. The side that anticipates change, adapts quickly, and protects its lifelines survives. Those who cling to old habits or ignore hidden vulnerabilities are left behind. Every war, every crisis, rewards not brute strength, but the foresight to see what others overlook. The British Navy's mastery of supply lines won the Battle of the Atlantic. The Japanese reliance on single supply routes doomed their campaigns in the Pacific. Failing to update your worldview, on the battlefield, in business, or in daily life, can turn a setback into a catastrophe. The strongest rarely win. Instead, those who adapt before disaster strikes shape the future. This is as true for nations as it is for individuals and organizations. The lesson is stark. Real power lies in tracing the hidden links and acting before they snap. In practical terms, this means constantly testing your own systems for weakness, running drills, and planning for disruption. It means asking, where is my Pavlohrad, and what will I do if it disappears tomorrow? Will you recognize the invisible threads in your own world and move before they break? The answer to that question may determine not just the outcome of conflicts, but the very shape of the world to come.